Well, here we are. Game's on. We now have a final published rule. We've waited long enough. Hi, my name is Dennis Diley, as Nathan informed you, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us here at ChemADVISOR to talk a little bit about the work ahead of all of us. It's certainly one of our first jobs, and what most of you have probably been thinking about is how does this inventory reset rule affect my company and the requirements that go along with it? And as a result of that, I'm going to ask you all for a show of hands, just figuratively, of course, how many have read the entire rule and the industry comments and EPA responses? Well, I was really just kind of kidding. Most of all, I was just trying to get you thinking a bit. And if you haven't and you have more questions about what I speak about here today, there's an awful lot in that. And if I don't, well, you're welcome to ask questions anyway. Let's take a look at what we're going to talk about. But I do want you to understand, please, that we've only got about a half an hour here, and there's an awful lot of detail and an awful lot to talk about, and it'd be impossible to touch on all of them. So I am going to stick pretty much to my script for solely just to stay on time. So I'm going to present what I believe is all the core information that'll apply pretty much to everyone, and try and touch on some of the pitfalls and problems you may encounter along the way, some of which I believe with good planning you could easily put to rest. I'm also making a broad assumption here that pretty much all of you are focusing on getting whatever reporting you need to do to get your substances on the inventory. But some, and maybe all of you, will have to make some forward-looking reporting issues and get those inactive substances moved to the active substance inventory. So we're going to have to start with some details and some of the facts here that will guide you and all of us towards what those activities you will be engaged in, and in some cases when you'll have to or will be engaging in them. Inventory reset, well, what is it? It's really a new way to look at a current existing TSCA inventory, and I'll use some graphics on the next slide to illustrate this and maybe help us all be sure we are on the same page. And perhaps we should all also know that TSCA was amended and is now the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety Act for the 21st Century Act, and I refer to it, and often many others do, and I might hear through on as LASCA, just because it's a whole lot shorter than saying the long official name. And it was LASCA that gave the mandate and authority through Section 8B, Subpart 4, to the EPA and required them to issue a final rule for retrospective reporting. Actually, what most of this presentation is going to be about. And it also gave them authority through Section 8B, Subpart 5B, requiring them to establish a way to do a forward-looking, or those forward-looking notices that we may have to do in the future. The timing of the rules also stated in the regulation, the new regulation in this, and it was supposed to be published and finalized by June 22nd of 2017, which you probably all know by now, happens to have been just this past week on August the 11th. So that translates to the fact that, and I'll get into more detail as we move along, that if you want to put a date on a calendar someplace, February 7th, 2018 is the final date for those publication or reporting for manufacturers, importers, which is 180 days from the publication on August of 11th. And we will talk more about processors. And simply, who does it apply to? Well, you can read it there: manufacturers, importers, and processors. As I said, I'd give you a little graphic here. Well, there's my TSCA inventory, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, and perhaps some more than others. And with the TSCA inventory, well, it's not really going away. We still have a confidential and a non-confidential or public version of the inventories we had before. But when we're done and have reset the inventory, we'll still have both a confidential and a public version. However, the inventory now consists of two parts, an active and an inactive part. And the significance of this probably is not lost on any of you, and will be very important to your business and the work you have out in front of you over the next 180 days or so. Yep, more details. And we've known this was coming for some time, since Lautenberg was finalized last June. And we've even had a chance to look at the new rule a few times. In January this year, we saw a proposal rule that gave us all a chance to read and comment on the proposal. And through statutory requirement and to their credit, EPA reviewed and considered all those comments, and that's what I was asking if anybody had read that. Made and published a preliminary or pre-publication copy just this last June, which, interestingly enough, was when it was supposed to have been finally published. And that, as you may know, was last Friday. And as I mentioned, the clock is ticking, and we must all get on with the work. Many of you already may be formulating a couple of questions as a result of what I've already talked about, but I'm going to ask you to bear with me. But if you should, you can actually type your questions in the right hand and in the box there on your screens. But we know when it comes to regulations, ultimately, we are always left with a few simple questions. One is, how does the regulation affect me or my company? I mean, probably the number one question. How well do I really know my products? And we always think we do, but when reality comes, we oftentimes don't know them as well as we think we do or as we should. And is there anything that I can get or do to get exemptions and to minimize my reporting load? And what is it that I'm going to have to report? What will the reporting require, and how will I do it? Well, you may be lucky, and this whole rule may not apply to you at all, or maybe it does, and well, I haven't seen anybody hang up yet, so I guess you're all in, must at least think you're in here. There's some simple requirements that if you remotely don't fit inside them, well, then you're out. If you're not an importer, manufacturer, or processor of chemicals, well, it doesn't apply to you. There are NAICS codes. I put and you're probably familiar with those for other types of reporting issues that kind of indicate who's in. The big ones are 325 and 324, but if for any reason you believe you may not qualify because of the type of business you're in, there is a published list, and you can check and see if somehow you may be exempted for that reason. But perhaps, and one of the biggest differences in this whole thing, though, will be whether you are a manufacturer, importer, or a processor. This rule is a bit unusual in that it applies to processors, and not only that, but after comments were made on the original rule, that's why I've asked if you read it, the processors were given another 240 days after the manufacturers and importers to report. Or to say it better, and as I have on the slide, they've got 420 days to report under this rule. Well, more about thinking about what we need to do is, if you do qualify as a company that needs to report, there's still a few things you need to look into. It probably goes down to maybe understanding of the new term we have here, and you can see I've repeated it just a few times here. And that's a term called the Lookback Period. And on its simplest level, it just defines a time period between June 21st, 2006 and June 21st, 2016. And in that time period, or the Lookback Period, if you manufactured, imported, or processed a substance for non-exempt commercial purposes, you're in. You need to report. And now listen to this, please, at any time during that look-back period, at any time. And if that's so, well, as I've said, you got some reporting to do. And yep, the look-back period's the same whether you're an importer, manufacturer, or processor. And as I will talk about in a bit more in a moment, as you start understanding more about the rule and our discussion gets a little deeper, you may find out that you or your company may be more than just an importer or more than a manufacturer, but you may be all three, depending on the product and the businesses that are involved in this. Perhaps this is another semi-detailed slide, seems to state the obvious about what you need to do. And you're saying to yourself, of course I need to check my products. And okay, I know that the look-back period is now because we've talked about it, but I think it really bears just kind of listening closely and seeing what I've got here and making sure that we're doing all that we are allowed to do and all that we can to make sure we get this right and report the right things in the right time frames. Manufacturers, look at all your sites. This is a company requirement. Make sure you know all of your legal entities, all those that should be and are required to report. Importers, or those of you who see yourselves as importers, are you sure you truly are the importer, or are you just buying imported goods that someone else is the importer of records? Make sure you understand this. Look at this carefully. Processors, have you used different vendors, suppliers over the past 10 years? Has there been any changes to those materials, and are you sure you know who the right person or entity is? And it pretty much applies to everyone, but can be a bit more troublesome to importers and processors. Do you know the 100% composition of what you're using? If not, you're going to be able to find it out. Will your supplier even tell you? This is all very critical stuff, very upfront, very basic knowledge, but important to what you do and can be extremely time consuming. Excuse me. Well, a little less facts and a little relief here, and at last maybe an out, a way to lighten your load and decrease your reporting volume. There are a few ways to exclude some of your substances from reporting. Yes, and once you get your list together, you can check your substances against the current active inventory. And actually, I'm going to take a minute here to note that our Lally product will soon be updated with that current active inventory list. It will be updated very soon, somewhere around the first part of September, and how you access and when you're able to get that will depend very much on how you access Lally today. We're going back to checking the list. That list has been published, and we're going to put it in Lally, and you can find it also on the EPA's Inventory Reset webpage. And rather than give you a URL that you try and write down, and I'll change the page on you, you can just put EPA Inventory Reset into your browser, and it'll most likely be the first hit. It is on me pretty much every time I do it. And that'll be an easy thing to check as well. What's on that inventory? That's kind of interesting to note. Substances that are reported for, or were reported for the 2012 and the 2016 CDR reporting. So all of your last 2 CDR reported substances will already be there. So if you've really minded your P's and Q's, certainly a lot of your substances, those are your higher volume ones anyway, are already going to be active and you won't need to report them. And also, if you've submitted PMNs and your substances have been added to the inventory via NOCs since 2006, June 21st, 2000, you're good as well. So you've checked in published active inventory, and if any of your substances are found for whatever reason, or you don't need to report. And actually, there's a few other ways you may get out of this as well. If you have a copy of a CDX receipt, there's no need to report. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but it's a bit of a pitfall, but actually can be a very good thing. So we'll look into it a bit further. And I'm going to mention this because it's a pitfall and it's a necessary thing you need to be thinking about from the beginning. It's also at this time, as you're thinking about what needs the reporting, you need to find out what it is you need to do to make sure you get your CBI claims done right and right up front. I'm not sure if I should have made this whole page a pitfall or not, but let me say, if you have not used or registered in CDX, you better get started. It can be very easy, or it can take you quite a bit of time and quite a bit of effort. We've got a lot of experience in this area here at ChemADVISOR, working with many clients, and I've seen it go both ways. But once you're all set and making the right choices in the CSPP or the Chemical Safety Pesticides Program section, you really don't need a whole lot of information. You really kind of done all your work by finding out what your individual substances are and by actually registering in CDX. So what they're looking for is the name and address of submitters, the authorized official and technical contacts. I've had a chance to kind of look around in the NOAs here, the new forms, and find out that actually you're able to transmit those first 3 from your registration right onto the form. So you're really down to the chemical specific information. And they've even made that fairly easy. They'll have a pull down menu. So if you've got basically items that are on the non-confidential or the public version of the inventory, they'll have CAS numbers. So you can put your CAS numbers in there and just begin to put it, choose off a pick list, save them, and continue to build your list for submission. You can do name fragments, like contains as well for the public inventory items. And if you have either previously for the initial inventory or during PMN submissions and ultimate substantiation, have things that are CBI, you can use your TSCA session numbers or generic names, and they have both of those on pull-down menus there as well. So it's really a pretty good tool. So it seems to work pretty well with what little bit and little time I've had to look at it. Well, that was a whirlwind, and I realize it's brief, but I think I touched on enough so that you can say, yep, I think I got that. But I hope for most, it was just a refresher and on the facts and the timelines, and you've had a chance to look at that final rule for all the 5 days we've had it. But what perhaps you haven't had time to think about is the big picture. What do you need to do? There's nothing like having the work at hand to make us begin to think about it a little bit more seriously and think about what problems or pitfalls may be waiting out there for you. Well, I talked about the look-back period, and it can cause an awful lot of record searching. Unless we understand what we really can and should be looking for. So we got the look-back period, and we got the dates. Okay, I think we understand it. Let's pay attention to a few simple facts I alluded to before. It applies to substances manufactured, imported, or processed at any time within the look-back period, and thus as long as it happened during the look-back period, it's okay. And it does not have to be happening currently. Meaning if you were doing it then, aren't doing it now, but it was happening then, it's legitimate, and actually you should be reporting that for this reset rule. And so maybe you find out that your substance isn't on the active list, or that it was introduced, more importantly, after June 21st, 2016, or the outside or the end of the look-back period. What does that mean? Well, simply it's not going to be eligible for reporting using the NOA Form A. It's going to be considered inactive. Unless you get lucky and someone else submits it and you find it on the active inventory. So when it's all said and done, because you don't qualify to submit it up early, you may find that someone else has done it when they publish the final active inventory. You'll find out that it's on there. Well, you got lucky and you're okay. Or you're just going to have to submit your forward-looking or your Notice of Activity Form B. And there's even a little bit of good news there. And I'll try and go slowly and bear with me on this a little bit, but you need not wait 90 days after the published inactive list or the publish of the final inventory that is now in 2 pieces. You can submit as soon as you find out that it is on the inactive list, because 1, that they allow you to do that, and 2, something is not officially, or substance is not officially considered inactive until 90 days after it's published. So if you've got this thing, it's in a product, you failed to report it, or there was an error, you've got 90 days before it's actually declared inactive to get your Form B in and get it moved over to the list. So if you don't fully get that, bear that in mind. That's something you might want to put in your back pocket and remember. CBI. I talked about it's an area that always is one you need to be careful and make sure you understand and that you do it right. After all, it's probably the lifeblood of your company. It's what often makes your products different and better than your competitors. So let's make sure we take a careful look at this. There's some things that I would say are a bit unusual, but things you better be sure you understand. The identity. Well, that's one of the first, and there are multiple ways in which you could claim CBI, and the thing that most people will claim if they have CBI claims. But you can only do it if you're the one who made the claim for existing claims. If you can't, reclaim it or do it because you'd like it. If you didn't do it, you can't do it, and actually they'll know and it'll be denied. As you may have done during PMNs in particular, there may be other non-identity claims. Those will have to be substantiated in the future, and there will be actually some rulemaking to that effect that the EPA will be publishing before too long. I don't have any dates for you on that. And it's even possible that some of the information that you wish to have kept confidential, and for the most part it probably won't be here, but it could be, it just may be exempt altogether from substantiation. You won't have to do it at all. Another issue about CBI is if you forget and nobody, or you don't do it and nobody else does, so you made an initial claim and you forgot or don't wish to make that claim. So if no claim is made on an existing CBI substance, the EPA is going to move it to the public inventory. There will remain forever. You have lost your opportunity. Keep in mind that EPA does and will validate CBI claims. They won't validate them all, but they have a mandate to validate CBI claims made on notifications and also for the CBI claims that will be made during this reporting period. And there's one to keep in mind because this is one you probably won't be thinking about. Manufacturers and importers are now under exemptions, particularly probably low volume exemptions or polymer exemptions. And there may be a few of you with low Rexes out there. You must report. Okay, so if you're sitting under a low volume exemption or any other exemption, you must report if that substance is present on the active inventory. What that simply means is you have a reporting obligation here, and by virtue of having a low volume exemption does not exempt you from reporting for the active inventory. So you just need to put that on your NOA Form A and report it in. And if for any reason that you could reasonably ascertain that the substance that you have is on the confidential inventory. Not a whole lot of detail on that, but particularly for the exemptions, you might want to keep that in mind. A lot of fun things here. Stuff you can really get hung up on, and probably in the time-consuming part of all this process, you may never get out of. You got to ask yourself, and certainly you'll be probably already working on this. Do you even know, and are you sure you know who your supplier is? Are your company records sufficient and accurate to give you the right information? And a lot of what ifs here, and these are what ifs to think about, because these are very what ifs, and it's best to think of these things up front and not when you're waited to the 179th day and you're about to put your substances in and you say, oh my goodness, I don't know if the supplier knew or even gave me the right identity. What did the supplier even tell you the identity? Obviously, they're protecting their confidential business information as well, or may feel they don't want you to know for competitive reasons. They may not tell you. Will they even tell a third party? Would they tell someone like ChemADVISOR who could act on your behalf what the composition or the identity is? What if the supplier buys from another company and tells you to contact them? So how long you thought you had a list and now you got another list. And then that supplier tells you they got it from somebody else. I tell you this only to think about that this could take longer than you think. And what if the supplier does not have good language skills? You can't understand them because they speak a foreign language. They may not speak English at all. Do you have language capabilities at your company? And what if the supplier offers a CDX receipt? That's kind of a new item. I have not run across them before, but it's something that is a part of this, and I mentioned on one of my earlier slides is one of the reasons you wouldn't have to report. The good news is actually if they offer you a CDX receipt, actually the only thing the EPA would accept as a reason for it as to why you didn't submit a required substance, you'd have that. But one of the drawbacks, and hence a pitfall, is it's only the submitter will know if that submission is withdrawn or there's a problem with it, because the EPA is only required to tell the submitter if there are any problems or errors with that submitted Form A. So if that happened, you may or may not ever find out that it never happened or that there was an issue with it. Imported substance, just another area you need to think through. It applies to a lot of parts in TSCA, but certainly for this, it's important because you got a limited amount of time, and you really need to understand: are you really the legal importer of record? This is one issue, and the answer to that may bring some other and more troubling questions to you. But the answer to those questions may find you at the end of the day actually really not as an importer, but maybe a processor. And the supplier you are buying it from is a true importer and is the one left with a requirement and a responsibility for submission of the Form A's on those particular substances. And this can even get more complicated when importing, when you may not know who the original manufacturer is. So you can find out about its true composition or how many layers of companies or buyers in more than one country you have to weed through just to find out what you've really been buying and using all along. And let's face it, none of us is perfect. And I said I get to this at the end. You may have missed one or two in your reporting, and it's realistic to understand that. So in the future, you may need to move a substance found on the inactive inventory to the active side and get it on the active inventory. Well, actually, probably some good news there. There's no PMNs or really lengthy reporting forms or submissions that you need to do. You've got 90 days prior to when you anticipate manufacturers to submit what's called the Form B. And the good news is just like the Form A, although I can tell you we have not been able to find it consistently on the site as of today. But you still need to check your CBI, as you had before, make sure you get it right. And perhaps as a real bonus here also, should you discover that a substance you are using or wish to use is on the inactive inventory, it may not yet be inactive. Goes back to the point I made earlier. You have 90 days from when it's published on the inactive list before the substance is officially an inactive substance. So if you're on top of things and you do notice that it's on the inactive, you got 90 days before you officially are using a substance that's not on the active inventory, and should give you more than enough time to get your Form B done. A lot of information, pretty close to a half an hour here, and a lot to digest, but hopefully you've been able to at least make some notes and think about this and get some of your concerns maybe clarified or at least crystallized in your mind. And I think that's perfectly okay. You can take some time to do that. But I do want to take just a moment here to let you know that ChemADVISOR is here to assist you, and actually in any way that we can. We'll even answer any questions you'll have here today, or if you write down and we don't get to them, we'll put them in writing and get them to you. On this in particular for today, but if it certainly is close to the related topic, we'll get to them as well. But understand that not only this, but we have a lot of experience here, and that's why we're doing this and feel comfortable in doing this, in reading and analyzing complex legal texts. I talked about it, and we can act as third party when CBI issues arise, and we can even assist you in your Form A or Form B submissions in the future. We are working with companies now and can work with you if you'd like in implementing strategies on how to go about this and make sure you meet your deadlines. And we have and could act as a government contact for you. If you have questions and don't want to be the one who answers or have to give your identity, we can do it for you. And we've been doing all of these things and many more things for many years and have a demonstrated ability to do that. And just a few tools that you may be using. I'm sure many of you are already LALI regulatory database users. Which we've got 128 and counting countries, aren't a whole lot left, and over 5,800 lists of which we publish on a periodic basis for you to access. And one of our new tools that I think is really working well for us, and I think is something you should take a look at, it's our Navigator, on which we have regulatory summaries in quite a bit of detail available to you to use online on over 54 countries. I think we bring a lot to the table. If we think that in any way ChemADVISOR can help you, give us a call. If not, I thank you for your time and your patience in listening to us. Have a good day.